Hi, my music lovers, my name is Gabi, and today I will be talking about scores from movie The Peasants. And it's actually the third time I'm starting to record this video. I feel like it's a sign, but third time is a charm, right? So, yeah. And as you can see, I have a different background and don't get used to it. It's my brother's room. I kicked him out and I don't even live at this house anymore. So, yeah, don't get used to it. We are starting with Historical Corner because this movie is actually based on a book written by Władysław Reymont between 1902 and 1908. And he actually got a Nobel Prize for this book in 1924. And both the book and the movie have 4 parts inside them because it's one book and one movie. And each part represents each season, starting with autumn. Then we have winter, spring, and summer. And the history takes place in the 19th century village in Polish called Lipce. And it's a beautiful story. You should read the book or watch the movie. So yeah, let's go to the first score. All the scores in this movie were created by LUC, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right because I don't even know how to pronounce it in Polish, and Rebel Bubble Film Orchestra. And in some scores there are other people included, but I will say that later. And the first score I chose for today is called Indian Summer, in Polish Babie Lato. And it's the beginning of the movie. It's setting the main theme, and orchestra uses historical and folk instruments because the movie is set in the late 19th century. And the opening is warm, calm, and slightly nostalgic. We have very soft dynamics and a low sustained drone in strings and folk bass instruments. And then we have the main theme entrance. It's lyrical, flowing, and introspective. Solo or exposed folk-style strings like violin, fiddle, or cello can be heard. Melody has a gentle arc to it. It rises, hovers, and falls. And harmonies remain simple, often moving in stepwise patterns beneath the melody. And after that, it gets fuller and more expressive. It builds emotional weight. More instruments join, like more strings and possibly clarinet or woodwinds or folk pipes. And repetition of the main theme can be heard, but with thicker texture, and slight dynamic increase or warm swell can be heard also. After that, we have the warm intensity and bittersweet richness. The main melody reaches its highest point and chords broaden with folk and orchestral colors. And we have the use of long, expressive string sustains. And near the end, we have this fading warmth. It's reflective and instruments gradually drop out. Melody returns to simpler form or a closing phrase. Harmonic movement slows and texture thins out noticeably, and at the very end it's soft, calm, and fading. We have the return of low drone or held notes from the intro. Ending is often unresolved or gently resting, not triumphant, and very soft dynamics, a sigh rather than a declaration. It leaves a lingering emotional aftertaste. I have for you Jagna. It's soft and we can hear strings and female vocals in the background, and it represents the main character. At the beginning we have quiet solo strings introducing a delicate motif, and very little harmony is exposed. Breath-like pauses between phrases can be heard, and a sense of character thinking but not yet acting. Then it gets lyrical and emotionally vulnerable. Ornamentation influenced by Slavic folk singing and violin inflections can be heard. Harmony remains simple. and the melody has a bittersweet flavor to it. It's beautiful but shadowed. And after that it gets fuller, warmer, and we have the blooming like suppressed feelings surfacing. Underlying harmonies finally enter, and the melody is repeated but with more layers and dynamic tension. And the harmony shifts slightly more dramatically, suggesting emotional turmoil. And then it gets darker and more restless. It reflects the pressure around Jagna. Rhythmic undercurrents begin. Harmony becomes more ominous or tense, and textures thicken briefly, pressing against the earlier gentleness. And then we have the brief release from tension. Instruments thin out, and we have a return of simpler melodic line. Harmonic tension resolves temporarily, and a soft, almost suspended silence between notes can be heard. And then we have the return of theme. It's resigned and more complex, and kind of bittersweet. Original motif returns, now with heavier harmonies underneath, and the melody may be played more firmly or more mournfully. Textures are deeper and less innocent. It gives us a sense of weight. And at the very end, it's somber but strong and reflective. Instruments gently drop out. Low strings and soft drones sustain the final harmony. Melody ends on a tone that feels unresolved, and a soft fade out rather than a decisive cadence. Next, I have for you Fights, in Polish Bijatyka, and it gives us this escalating tension, physical aggression, and disorder. Overlapping emotional forces like rage, fear, or tragic inevitability. And it gives us a sense of communal pressure and violent social dynamics. And it starts with low percussion with a steady omnibus pulse. A sparse, tense drones establish the tonal center. Small violin gestures or ornamented motifs flicker in and out, and it gives us this brewing anger and social pressure. And then we have the sudden movement and the outbreak of violence. Percussion becomes more accented and aggressive. Short brass or string stabs create sharp impacts. Rhythm tightens, and folk instruments begin harsher, more pursued playing. And it represents the first physical impact. And then we have the chaos in motion. And we have this unrestrained aggression and crowd frenzy. Fast ostinatos in strings or reeds can be heard, and layered percussion creating rhythmic density. Dissonant clusters can be heard and dynamic swells mimicking chaotic movement. In the middle section, a lower, more sustained harmonic bed reemerges. Tension is filled with long notes under the chaos. And folk timbres blend with orchestral tones in mournful way. Near the end, the brutality peaks, and percussion reaches maximum intensity. And short, loud, stabbing figures repeat quickly. Harmonic movement becomes minimal, almost like a wall of sound. Violin may screech or rise into extreme registers. And at the end we have exhaustion, silence, and brokenness. We have the sudden drop in density, and rhythmic activity dies. Final sounds may be low, hollow, or unresolved. Welcome back to Historical Corner. Yes, again. Sorry for that. But I will be talking about Polish wedding traditions, and disclaimer, we don't celebrate these traditions anymore, just if you're curious, so yeah. And Polish rural wedding tradition from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In villages, weddings were not just personal events. They were communal rituals filled with symbolism, superstition, and gender expectations. In traditional peasant life, a wedding marked the shift from maidenhood to womanhood, carrying expectations of obedience, fertility, moral purity, and loyalty to the husband's household. Traditional village weddings were public, not private, and the community determined whom one should marry, whether a match was proper, and whether traditions were followed correctly. So the next score is actually a song, and I will try to translate it for you and give you translation somewhere here. And the reason that I gave you a historical corner right before that is because this song was played right before the main character's wedding that she didn't want. And this song is ceremonial, intimate, and feminine. It begins with accompanied or lightly accompanied female voices. Modal folk bass melody can be heard, and ornamentation typical of Slavic villages, like tight vibrato or nasal resonance. Simple rhythmic delivery, almost chant-like. And then we have the main vocal entrance. It's communal, joyful, and playful but formal at the same time. More bridesmaids join, thickening the vocal texture, and we can hear the repetition of lines. Harmonies stay close, and pulse becomes more defined, often with a simple beat from a frame drum or hand percussion. And then it gets spirited, rhythmic, and we have this building energy. Percussion becomes more noticeable, and a steady dance-like rhythm develops. Fiddle may join with short ornamental lines. And we have this call and response patterns between soloist and the group. And the middle section is bittersweet, reflective, and feminine. Melody becomes more expressive. Harmonic center deepens with drone or sustained background tones. Subtle dissonances add emotional depth. Some lines may be directed symbolically to the bride, like blessings, warnings, or encouragements. And near the end it gets festive, swirling, and almost ecstatic. Percussion strengthens, and fiddle and reeds play lively motifs. Vocals overlap slightly, creating polyrhythmic layers, and tempo feels like accelerating even if it doesn't. And at the very end it's calming and warm. Vocals taper off, and instruments drop out gradually. We have the repetition of the final line, and final tone often ends open rather than fully resolved, and it's typical of folk songs. Najechali dobre ludzie, chcą cię brać. Next I chose for you Wedding Mazurka, or in Polish Mazur Weselny. And the entrance is ceremonial, confident, and festive. It begins with a clear mazurka accent. Fiddles or folk strings introduce a bright ornamented motif. Light percussion enters softly, establishing the dance pulse. And harmony remains stable and modal, grounded in a rustic tonality. Then it gets lively, cheerful, and socially vibrant. A clear melodic theme is played by fiddle or reeds. A fast ornamented grace notes, typical of Mazovia, can be heard. And Mazovia is actually a region in Poland. In Polish it's Mazowsze, just if you're curious. And drone-like accompaniment beneath the melody can be heard. Then it gets energetic and social excitement is rising. The mazurka's characteristic dotted rhythms become sharper and violin lines become more virtuosic. Percussion becomes more pronounced and harmonies may add subtle dissonances for color. The middle section is playful and decorative. Melody is varied, either simplified or ornamented. And we can hear a possible shift to a nearby mode or key area. And we can also hear layering of instruments. And then we have the peak of the dance. It's exuberant, celebratory, and almost ecstatic. Strong mazurka accents are sharp, proud, and grounded. Harmonies tighten to create forward momentum. And percussion reaches its most animated patterns. And at the end we have this warm ceremonial close. We have the return of the main theme, or a simplified version of it. A gradual reduction of instrumentation can be heard, and strong final cadence on the tonic or open fifth. And tempo may slow slightly to signal the end of the dance. The next score I will be talking about is actually one of my favorite scores from this movie, and I love it so much that if I ever get married, I want my first dance to this score. Just saying. And it's called Wolne Wolta, or Miłosny Opętaniec in Polish. And Wolne means slow or free, and Wolta is a type of slow Polish folk dance, often performed in pairs with a circling motion. And it starts calm, tender, and slightly nostalgic. We have the very soft, slow tempo, like free and breathing. And a single melodic instrument, often a fiddle, enters with a long, expressive phrase. Subtle accompaniment or drone in the background can be heard, and harmonies stay simple. After that, it gets contemplative and intimate. The main melody appears, lyrical and smooth. Bow slides and expressive phrasing give the melody a human voice-like quality. Meter feels present but lightly marked, as if dancers move in slow circling steps. And harmony remains understated. After that, we have the gentle progression and emotional stirring. A soft pulse emerges, very light percussion or plucked strings. Melody becomes slightly more structured, and small repeated motifs appear, giving shape to the dance. The tempo remains slow but more grounded. Then we have the blooming emotions and more expressive intensity. Melody becomes more ornamented and rises to higher registers. Harmony deepens, and instruments layer more noticeably, though still gently. The rhythmic pulse grows firmer without losing softness. Near the end, we have the calm after expression, and it's settling down. Melody returns in a simpler form, and ornamentation reduces. Accompaniment thins again, and the pulse slows, becoming more fragile. At the very end, we have the soft ending and fading emotions. Harmony resolves into an open, gentle cadence, and instruments drop out one by one. Final note often held, then allowed to evaporate. And it ends without drama, just simplicity and breath. Next I have for you Death, in Polish Śmierć, and it's emotionally charged, symbolic, and it reflects tragedy, inevitability, and cruel communal fate. It starts cold, suspended, and fated. Very sparse texture can be heard at the beginning, often a low drone or single sustained pitch. Lack of rhythmic pulse is creating a feeling of frozen time. Dissonant harmonies or microtonal inflections are reminiscent of morning rituals. And we have this quiet, pretty timbres with winds, strings, or sound design. And then we have the tension and inevitability. A short, descending motifs, often minor or chromatic, can be heard. Slow tempo and heavy phrasing. Strings may play with bow pressure, and they're creating a rough, grainy timbre. Subtle low percussion or heart-like pulses may appear. And then we have the sorrow, grief, and human fragility. A plaintive melodic lines rises, usually on fiddle or voice-like strings. Ornamentation echoes Slavic lament traditions, cry-like slides and narrow intervals. Harmony tightens slightly, adding mournful dissonance, and the melody may struggle upward before falling back again. Then it gets heavy, more oppressive and fateful. Low percussion or deep drones swell in the background. Harmonic clusters or slow moving chords create tension, and timbres resemble collective mourning, a ritual atmosphere. And repetition of the dark motif is heard in lower instruments. Near the end, we have the peak tragedy, which is death in this case, and emotional collapse. And we have the intensification of texture, and dissonances reach their strongest point. Rhythm is still minimal. Tragedy happens in slow motion, and brief surges of volume or sharp accents represent the breaking point. At the very end, it's empty, resigned, and haunting. Texture rapidly thins. Melodic fragments fall apart and evaporate. Final notes are often unresolved or ending on an open interval. Silence or near silence play a major role in this case. For the next one, I chose Antek, which is also a name of one of the main characters. It's conflicted, restless, and it represents raw masculinity. Low strings or drones begin quietly but with tension. A dark, pulsing rhythm emerges, slow, heavy, and unstable. Subtle dissonances reflect Antek's inner turmoil, and instrumentation often features deep folk timbres, grounding him in the peasant world. And then it's yearning, impulsive, and emotionally charged. A melodic motif appears, short, intense, and often rising. Strings may swell with expressive slides, hinting at longing. Rhythmic patterns tighten and increasing forward pull. Subtle percussion begins marking a heartbeat-like pulse. And then it gets rustic, strong, and earthy. Traditional folk instruments like fiddle, baraban, or reeds can be heard. And dance-like accents appear, but rougher and more aggressive than celebratory dances. Rhythm becomes more physical, almost muscular, and harmony thickens, rooted in minor or modal tones. The middle section is torn, unstable, and morally uncertain. Melody fragments are interrupted and hesitant. Dissonant chords or sliding tones signal psychological strain. Percussion softens, giving space to emotional turmoil. Harmonic movement becomes unpredictable, reflecting indecision. And near the end, it's fierce, uncontrolled, and emotionally explosive. Rhythm intensifies suddenly, and fast patterns or sharp accents can be heard. Strings become more forceful, bow pressure is increased. Harmonic tension peaks. A burst of layered instrumentation creates emotional overload. And at the very end, it's defeated, ashamed, and empty. Textures thin dramatically, and remaining tones are low, subdued, and unresolved. Small melodic fragments return quietly but now weakened, and the notes often end on an open or minor interval. The next score is called Hate, which is Nienawiść in Polish. It's dark, emotionally destructive, and it represents anger. It starts with low drones or deep strings with pursued bowing. We can hear quiet but dissonant tones that never resolve. A slow pulse that feels like held breath, and sparse instrumentation to create emotional numbness. Then it gets creeping, insidious, and communal. Uneasy rhythmic patterns emerge, irregular and unsteady. Tense harmonies cluster together, and subtle percussive textures give the sense of many tiny movements. And next it gets sharper, more direct, and we can hear this violent tension. Stronger accents and low percussion can be heard, and harsh bow strokes or stabs in strings. Dissonant chords build weight and pressure. Melodic fragments become sharper and more irregular. The middle section is chaotic, explosive, and overpowering. Full ensemble surges with dense dissonance, and rhythm becomes insistent, aggressive, almost mob-like. Strings and reeds may scream or slide violently. Percussion pounds in heavy, ritualistic patterns. And near the end, we have this unresolved rage and brutality. Sharp accents and sudden bursts of sound can be heard. Overlapping layers create the wall of tension, and harmonic sparse collapses into near chaos. High register strings shriek and low register instruments pound. And at the very end, we have this emptiness, numbness, and chilling silence. Texture drops instantly, and it drops into a near silence. Remaining tones are hollow, unresolved, and coldly static. Lack of pulse feels like time is frozen, and final notes fade without comfort or closure. And now we have the last score from the movie itself, because there are also two songs that weren't included in the movie, but they are awesome, and I'm going to talk about them after this one. And this score is called Catharsis, and it's emotional, painful, and raw. And it's morally complicated. The beginning is hollow, fragile, and reflective. Sparse, quiet texture, often a single instrument holding a trembling note, can be heard at the very beginning. Soft dissonances that suggest deep emotional bruising. Very slow pulse is like movement, and a sense of inhalation can be felt. The music seems to prepare for something painful. And then we have the swelling grief. Tension seeking outlet. A melodic fragment begins to rise, often violin or voice-like strings. Harmonic space thickens with quiet layers, and subtle rhythmic tremors evoke trembling. Tension grows through repeated upward gestures. And then we have the painful release, and it's overwhelming. Larger melodic arcs appear, expressive and full-bodied. Strings intensify with slides and sob-like accents. Dynamic swells evoke crying, shouting, or breaking. The middle section is turbulent, liberating, but anguished. Full ensemble comes in with thicker textures. Pulses strengthens with driving momentum. Harmonies shifts more boldly, suggesting transformation. Melodic lines interweave in counterpoint, heightening emotional complexity. Near the end, we have this overwhelming release and emotional clarity. It's the loudest and the fullest part of the cue. Harmony transcendence into opening to a wide, almost spiritual sound. Strings or winds may soar into high, clear registers. Rhythmic force is strong but not violent, more like a heartbeat returning to life. And at the very end, it's calm, emptied, and cleansed. Texture thins again, now softer and more peaceful. Harmonic dissonance fades into quiet cadence or open intervals. Slow, gentle phrases float downward, and it ends with breath-like stillness. And now we're going to the songs. And the first one is Autumn Dance, in Polish Jesień, Tańcuj, and it features Kaja, Laboratorium Pieni, and Tęgie Chłopy. It's vibrant, celebratory, and it gives us this physical energy and a little hint of chaos. The beginning is lively, anticipatory, and communal. Quick dance-like rhythm is introduced immediately. Folk instruments like fiddles, pipes, and frame drum set a rustic tone. Simple but infectious melodic motif is introduced, and bright timbre and lots of upper register motion can be heard. Then it gets cheerful, earthy, and grounded. We can hear this clear dance pulse. Its rhythmic patterns suggest stomping, spinning, and jumping. We have this ornamented folk-style violin phrases and drone-like accompaniment beneath a more agal melody. And then it gets festive, and we have this rising excitement. Tempo may quicken or feel like it's accelerating through musical drive. Additional instruments enter, thickening texture. Rhythmic accents grow sharper and more irregular, suggesting spinning dancers. Melodic fragments echo between instruments, creating lively call and response pattern. The central section is exuberant, ecstatic, and we have this borderline chaotic thing going on. Full ensemble is playing at maximum energy. Fiddle lines race with virtuosic passages and aggressive bowing. Percussion pounds with a strong driving pulse, and harmonies remain folk-like open intervals, modal color, but richer and more vibrant. Then we have this joy mixed with tension. We have this vitality on edge, and underlying harmonies shift slightly darker, and repeated motifs turn sharper and more urgent. Brief musical peak, followed by little drops, can be heard, and subtle irregularities in rhythm that feel almost dangerous. And at the end, it's breathless, and we have this emptied satisfaction. Texture collapses suddenly, and final chords are open, rustic, and unresolved. Rhythmic pulse stops sharply as if the dancer suddenly halted, and a fade, echo, or single instrument may close the track. And last but not least, we have End of Summer, in Polish Koniec Lata. And this song actually has an English version, but personally I think the Polish version is better. So I will give you a lyrics from English version here, but I will be talking about Polish version. And in this song are featured Kwiat Jabłoni, Bella and Karolina Skrzyńska. It's calm, reflective, and we have this seasonal structure. It gives us the emotional change, stillness and reflection. It starts calm, reflective, and slightly wistful. Soft, sustained tones, often strings or gentle folk instruments, begin. Open harmonies are suggesting air and space. Minimal rhythm is creating a feeling of lingering sunlight. Then it gets nostalgic and tender. A simple lyrical melody appears, often on fiddle or flute-like timbre. Folk ornamentation is delicate and restrained. Phrasing is long and breath-like. Harmony stays modal, warm but slightly shaded. And then we have the slow movement and inevitability. A soft pulse begins to form. Repeated notes or motifs suggest passing days. Texture thickens very gently, never becoming heavy. Slight shifts in harmony mark time moving forward. And after that, the melancholy deepens. We have the sadness, introspection, and quiet acceptance. Melody dips into lower register. Minor inflections become more noticeable. Sustained harmonies grow darker, and instrumentation gains emotional weight without increasing volume. And near the end, we have clarity and gentle sorrow. A brief melodic rise is more expressive than before. Harmonic openness returns, but now tinged with sadness. Fever notes can be heard, but each one carries weight. And we have this sense of emotional understanding. And at the end, it's calm, and we have this fading warmth. Final notes often resolve softly or remain open. Instruments drop out gradually, and silence becomes part of the music. Ending feels natural, like daylight slowly disappearing. So that would be it for today's video. If you liked it, please leave a like, and if you have any suggestions, please leave a comment. I will definitely get into it. And all my social media accounts are linked in the description, so go check it out, because I don't only post here, just saying. And if you heard any sounds in the background, I'm so sorry for that, but usually when I'm recording, I'm home alone. Now I'm not, so yeah. And I'm sorry that I wasn't really looking into the camera, but at my place I have this whole setup that when I read notes, you don't see it, but here I couldn't do that, so sorry for that. And yeah, see you in my next video. Bye!